Don't bother me. I got problems of my own.
Feed me.
I'm sorry, pal. I'm fresh out of blood. Talk to somebody else.
I'm hungry.
I don't care what you are. Can't you see I'm knocked out? I just killed a man. I'm a murderer. You think it's fun to be a murderer? You think it's fun to haul around a sack full of...
It was the late 1920s. America was between two eras. The Jazz Age had danced itself into exhaustion, and the Great Depression loomed like a shadow no one could name yet. In the steel-gray city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on April 1, 1929, a child was born who would one day make the world laugh at the absurd and weep for the forgotten. His name was Jonathan Haze, though at birth he was simply Jack Aaron Schachter, the son of a Jewish shopkeeper and a mother who believed movies were small miracles. As a boy, Jonathan was small, quiet, and endlessly curious. While other kids chased baseballs, he spent afternoons in dark movie theaters, his eyes wide as the projector light cut through the cigarette smoke. He watched Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney, and Bette Davis, faces that burned with courage and heartbreak. To him, they weren't just actors, they were worlds. They were proof that the gray and narrow streets of Pittsburgh could open into something infinite. Movies were a kind of prayer, Jonathan once said. You sat in the dark and believed, even if just for 90 minutes. By 1948, the war had ended. Hollywood was booming again. Neon lights, convertible cars, movie palaces glittering across California nights. And somewhere in that golden sprawl, a 19-year-old Jonathan arrived with one suitcase, $50 in his pocket, and the stubborn certainty that he belonged there. He found a cheap room in a boarding house near Sunset Boulevard, where the walls were thin and the air smelled of dust and dreams. By day, he delivered packages. By night, he rehearsed monologues from Hamlet in front of a cracked mirror. He auditioned. He failed. He tried again. Hollywood, as always, didn't notice. But Jonathan didn't need applause. He only needed a chance. In the early 1950s, Jonathan enrolled in the Pasadena Playhouse, a small theater school that had quietly birthed legends, Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman, William Holden. There, he found his tribe, dreamers, misfits, and outcasts, who spoke in lines from Shakespeare and smoked cheap cigarettes between rehearsals. He learned not just acting, but truth, that a whisper could hold more power than a scream, that a nervous smile could tell 1,000 stories. He wasn't the kind of actor who dominated a scene, a classmate later recalled. He belonged to the scene. He made everyone else shine. Fate, in Hollywood, rarely arrives with a fanfare. Sometimes it's just a handshake in a crowded diner. In 1953, Jonathan met a young, restless filmmaker named Roger Corman, a man who, like him, didn't fit the mold. Corman had ideas that the studios considered madness: make movies fast, cheap, and fearless. Jonathan had the face of an ordinary man, which, in Corman's world of monsters and aliens, made him extraordinary. Corman's archival quote: "Jonathan wasn't a star, he was real, and real people are rare in Hollywood." Their collaboration began almost by accident, a small part here, a line there, but soon grew into one of the most quietly iconic partnerships in mid-century cinema. Between 1954 and 1960, Jonathan appeared in a series of Roger Corman's films, It Conquered the World, The Undead, and The Day the World Ended. Critics dismissed them as cheap sci-fi, but audiences adored them. Why? Because Jonathan's characters, awkward, tender, a little lost, were never caricatures. They were people. They were us. He brought a kind of humanity to the absurd. Even when the monsters looked like rubber puppets, Jonathan made you care. That's what he did best, film historian Michael Bliss later wrote. He made the unbelievable believable because he believed it. The turning point came in 1960. Corman handed Jonathan a script titled The Little Shop of Horrors. a dark comedy about a florist who accidentally grows a man-eating plant. A film shot in just 2.5 days. No budget, no stars, no expectations. Jonathan read it and laughed. "This is insane," he told Corman. Corman smiled. "Exactly." As Seymour Chlorine-Boyne, the awkward shop assistant who feeds people to his beloved plant Audrey 2, Jonathan became a tragic clown, tender, terrified, and unforgettable. The movie was a mess by Hollywood standards, but in its chaos, it found something pure, the beating heart of outsider cinema. After The Little Shop of Horrors wrapped up, Jonathan didn't become a superstar. He didn't own a mansion or walk red carpets. But he didn't vanish either. He kept working, writing, producing, helping friends with their films. He became what he had always wanted to be, a storyteller. For him, success wasn't measured in fame. It was measured in stories told truthfully. Hollywood, he once said, was never a place. It was a state of mind, a promise that even the smallest dream could matter. As the decades passed, Hollywood changed. The lights got brighter, the stories louder. And Jonathan Haze, the quiet man from Pittsburgh, slowly faded from the spotlight. But for those who remembered, his face lingered like a flicker from a projector reel. Gentle, honest, human. Some stars burn for centuries, others only long enough to remind us how dark the night can be without them. Jonathan Haze never sought fame. He sought truth, in the smallest gesture, in the quietest moment, in a world that often forgot to listen. And maybe that's why even now, decades later, his light still lingers, not on billboards, not in headlines, but in the quiet hearts of those who still believe in the magic of black and white dreams.
Every story has its silence, the moment when applause fades and a man is left alone with his thoughts. For Jonathan Haze, that silence was not an ending. It was a return to the quiet world he had always belonged to. Scene 1. The Fade from Hollywood. The 1960s rolled in with thunder. Hollywood was changing, faster, louder, brighter. Big studios were collapsing, new directors were rising, and the old guard of B-movie rebels was scattered to the wind. Roger Corman continued to make films, each one bolder than the last. But Jonathan Haze, quietly, stepped away. He had seen what he wanted to see, told the stories he needed to tell. Now he longed for something simpler, a life unchained from the camera's gaze. There was no dramatic farewell, no announcement, no press release. He just stopped showing up on call sheets. Hollywood, as it always does, moved on. But Jonathan was at peace with that. He once said, "I didn't leave Hollywood. I just walked far enough away to see it clearly." In the years that followed, Jonathan explored the world behind the lens. He tried his hand at writing screenplays, editing, even producing small independent projects. He wasn't chasing success anymore. He was chasing meaning. Stories that didn't need stars or fame, just truth. He worked quietly with small production companies, helping young filmmakers polish their scripts. He gave advice, lent equipment, sometimes even acted in student projects, uncredited, unpaid, but fulfilled. A young director once recalled, "Jonathan would show up with sandwiches, a light kit, and this quiet wisdom. He'd say, 'Don't worry about perfection, worry about honesty.'" That became his new calling, teaching others how to tell stories that mattered. Away from film sets, Jonathan lived simply. He rented a modest apartment near Los Angeles, filled with old film posters, stacks of scripts, and shelves of VHS tapes. He had no entourage, no assistants, no publicist, just books, movies,
and a typewriter that clicked late into the night. He was known in the neighborhood as the nice man with old movies. He fed stray cats, watered plants, and spent weekends at flea markets hunting for vintage reels. Every so often, a fan would recognize him. They'd ask, "Are you Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors?" He would smile, shake their hand, and reply softly, "I used to be." Then he'd laugh, not bitterly, but with warmth, because to him that character still lived, somewhere between fiction and memory. As time passed, Hollywood's attention drifted further away, but those who had known Jonathan, actors, directors, crew members, never forgot. Roger Corman often mentioned him in interviews. "He was part of my foundation. He brought humanity to my madness." Old colleagues remembered his patience, his humor, his quiet professionalism. He was the kind of man who never asked for credit, yet everyone trusted completely. When The Little Shop of Horrors gained new life in the 1980s musical remake, Corman invited him to the premiere. Jonathan attended, quietly slipping into a back row. He watched the audience laugh and sing, new faces discovering an old dream. And when the lights came up, he whispered to himself, "It's still alive." Every story must end, but some stories end the way they began, quietly, honestly, and full of light. For Jonathan Haze, the curtain never truly fell. It simply lowered into a gentle dusk. In the final decade of his life, Jonathan Haze lived much as he always had, quietly. His days were simple: morning walks through his Los Angeles neighborhood, afternoons filled with old movies, evenings spent answering letters from fans who still discovered him through the Little Shop of Horrors. He no longer acted, yet he never left the world of cinema. When independent film students reached out, he would reply, often beginning with, "Tell the story you'd want to see if you had only one movie left to make." Friends said his laughter was unchanged, soft, humble, tinged with wonder. Even as his body slowed, his eyes still carried the brightness of a man who once dreamed in black and white. By 2024, Jonathan's health had begun to fade. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried a calm acceptance. He told a longtime friend, "I've lived many lives, all inside one. That's the gift of movies. You never really die, you just wait for the next screening." On November 2nd, 2024, at his Los Angeles home, Jonathan Haze passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 95 years old. There were no headlines at first, no red carpet tributes, no breaking news alerts, just a whisper among those who had known him, a ripple moving quietly through the industry he had once illuminated. A few days later, the news spread. The Hollywood Reporter wrote, "Jonathan Haze, cult film favorite and star of Roger Corman's The Little Shop of Horrors, has passed away. He was 95. Tributes followed, from filmmakers, actors, and fans across generations. Roger Corman, then 98, released a statement. "Jonathan wasn't just an actor in my films. He was their conscience. He could make the ridiculous feel real and the ordinary seem extraordinary. I owe much of my career to him." Younger directors who had never met Haze still posted his photo, writing captions like, "The face that made B movies feel human." Film students in New York held a midnight screening of The Little Shop of Horrors in his honor. When the credits rolled, no one clapped. They simply sat in silence, listening to the hum of the projector. In early December 2024, a small group of fans gathered outside the old Pasadena Playhouse where Jonathan once studied. They placed candles, flowers, and an old VHS copy of The Little Shop of Horrors at the steps.
Someone taped a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for showing us that being ordinary is extraordinary enough." Passers-by stopped, smiled, and lit their own candles. By nightfall, the entire staircase glowed softly, a quiet memorial for a man who never sought one. Months later, film retrospectives began celebrating Jonathan's work. Streaming platforms added a Roger Corman Classics section, and there he was again. The nervous smile, the kind eyes, the man feeding a strange plant in a black and white world. Critics revisited his performances, now seeing what time had clarified, that beneath the camp and chaos was a sincerity Hollywood rarely captured anymore. One journalist wrote, "Jonathan Haze acted as if the camera were a confession booth. You didn't watch him perform, you watched him feel." His name appeared in film textbooks, his movies in university syllabi. Students debated his influence, calling him the first indie everyman. He had finally become timeless, not through fame, but through faith. At the close of every Stars Remembered episode, there is a candle. For Jonathan Haze, the flame burns a little longer. The screen fades to a still frame of his face, gentle, curious, lit by that same projector glow that once filled a Pittsburgh theater nearly a century ago. He came to Hollywood with nothing but a dream, and gave back a story that still breathes. He never chased the light. He carried it, and in so doing, he showed us that the smallest spark can outlast the brightest flame. Jonathan Haze, 1929 to 2024. The storyteller who taught us to believe. Beneath it, a dedication appears. This episode of Stars Remembered is dedicated to all the dreamers who never stopped believing, just like Jonathan.
When a great star dies, the sky grows quieter. But when a humble one fades, the silence feels deeper. On November 2, 2024, Hollywood didn't lose a celebrity. It lost something rarer, its conscience. The morning after Jonathan Haze passed away, the world awoke to a quiet headline. A simple tweet from a small film archive read, "Jonathan Haze, star of The Little Shop of Horrors, has left us at 95. Thank you for the dreams." It didn't trend, it didn't make the front page. But in corners of the internet, where film lovers gather, forums, cinephile blogs, small YouTube channels, something began to happen. People started sharing clips, posters, interviews, scenes of Seymour feeding the plant, moments of Haze's nervous laugh and trembling eyes. And slowly, the silence filled with stories. A new generation discovered the man their parents had once watched in black and white. For them, it wasn't nostalgia, it was revelation. Within days, tributes poured in, not from tabloids, but from artists, directors, editors, actors who understood what Jonathan represented. Roger Corman, his lifelong friend and collaborator, released a short message online. He was never loud, never demanding, never false. He made film feel human again. The world is dimmer without him. Famous directors followed. Martin Scorsese called Haze a poet of vulnerability. Guillermo del Toro wrote, "He brought soul to the absurd. That's true art." And indie filmmaker Jim Jarmusch simply posted a black screen with the words, "Seymour lives." Small theaters across America organized midnight screenings of The Little Shop of Horrors. In each one, the audience laughed, cried, and applauded, not for the plant, not for the plot, but for the man who made it real. In December 2024, the Pasadena Playhouse, the place where Jonathan's journey began, hosted a small tribute. There was no grand ceremony, no red carpet, just an old stage, a few lights, and a projector humming softly. Former students, local actors, and a few surviving friends gathered. They screened The Little Shop of Horrors one more time. Film grain, scratches, flickering light, and all. At the end,
The audience stood in silence. Someone whispered, "He's still here." On the stage, a single chair sat empty, a symbol of every quiet artist who had once dreamed from that same wooden floor. As tribute spread, Hollywood began to reflect on what Jonathan Haze truly represented. He wasn't just part of Roger Corman's legacy, he was a symbol of the artists who keep the dream alive from behind the spotlight. Trade journals published essays about him. Haze was never the hero of the story, he was its heart. Before indie film became fashionable, he was living it. Younger filmmakers called him the patron saint of sincerity. Film schools added The Little Shop of Horrors to their curriculum, not as a comedy, but as a lesson in how authenticity transcends limitations. In one lecture at UCLA, a professor concluded, "Haze reminds us that every frame of film deserves respect, even the cheap ones." By early 2025, the ripple had become a wave. Clips of Jonathan's films trended across YouTube and TikTok, not as memes, but as tributes. Creators posted montages titled "The Man Who Believed in Small Dreams." Old interviews resurfaced, where Jonathan spoke humbly about never expecting to be remembered. His image appeared in fan art and short films, even in animated tributes. For the first time in decades, Jonathan Haze's name was alive again, not as nostalgia, but as inspiration. Film historians called it the Haze Revival. For many, it felt like Hollywood had rediscovered its soul, the handmade, imperfect beauty that once defined its golden age. In the months following his passing, time dims every spotlight, but some lights refuse to fade. They linger, not on stages, but in the hearts of those who still dare to dream. Jonathan Haze was one of those lights. Long before the word independent became fashionable, Jonathan Haze was already living it. He worked in an era when filmmaking was controlled by studios, by budgets, by perfection. But Haze, with Roger Corman and a handful of dreamers, proved something extraordinary, that you didn't need millions to tell the truth. All you needed was a story, a camera, and faith. That philosophy became the seed of what the world now calls independent cinema. Without knowing it, Jonathan helped open the door for generations who came after him. Filmmakers who dared to be small, to be strange, to be real. As Quentin Tarantino once said, "Without Roger Corman's world, there is no me. And without Jonathan Haze, there's no heart in that world." Jonathan never taught in classrooms. He never wrote books or gave lectures. But his career became a lesson, a living textbook in sincerity. Film students now study his work not for its technical mastery, but for its honesty. They analyze how he turned budget limitations into emotional depth, how his nervous energy became empathy, how his awkwardness became truth. At universities across America, from UCLA to NYU, professors teach the Haze Principle. Act like you mean it, even when the world doesn't believe you. It's the lesson of the dreamer, to stand in front of cardboard sets and still imagine the universe. Across decades, the light of Jonathan Haze has quietly passed from one artist to another. In the humor of Tim Burton, you can see Haze's mixture of innocence and darkness. In the humanity of Greta Gerwig's characters, you can feel that same vulnerability, the courage to be small and sincere in a world too loud. In the chaotic energy of Taika Waititi's comedies, you catch the same absurd compassion that The Little Shop of Horrors once celebrated. And in every independent filmmaker shooting guerrilla style with borrowed equipment, Jonathan's spirit whispers, "Don't wait for permission, just create." He became, unknowingly, the patron saint of creative rebellion, the gentle reminder that imperfection is not failure, it's proof of humanity. For decades, Jonathan Haze lived in the margins of film history books. But over time, historians began to realize He wasn't a footnote. He was a foundation. His performances marked a transition from classic Hollywood acting to modern realism. He bridged the gap between myth and man, between performance and presence. Roger Corman himself once admitted, late in life, "Jonathan showed me what truth looked like. I was busy making monsters. He made them human." That insight changed everything. It reshaped how audiences saw low-budget cinema, not as junk, but as folk art, stories made by people for people, with whatever tools they could find. Jonathan was the face of that honesty. Every year, somewhere in the world, The Little Shop of Horrors is performed, on stages, in schools, in community theaters. And every time the actor playing Sermo nervously steps forward, a little of Jonathan lives again. They may not all know his name, but they know his soul. The awkward, kind, trembling dreamer who tried to do right and ended up feeding something far bigger than himself. Audiences still laugh, still cry, still see themselves in that man holding the watering can. "It's strange," a fan once wrote online, "that a movie about a man-eating plant could make you feel seen." That is Jonathan's magic, making the absurd deeply human. In the decades since his passing, filmmakers and storytellers continue to quote him, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unconsciously. Every time a director tells their cast, "We don't have time or money, but let's make it count," they're echoing Jonathan's spirit. Every time an actor turns nervousness into authenticity, they're walking the same path he once did. He showed that sincerity doesn't age, and truth doesn't need special effects. His career is a love letter to belief. Belief in art, in people, in the quiet beauty of trying. He came from a city of steel and smoke, and brought warmth to the cold machinery of cinema. He played the fool, the dreamer, the frightened man, but he was never afraid of being real. In a world of blockbusters and bright lights, Jonathan Haze remains a small, steady flame. Proof that the truest stars are the ones that never need to shine the brightest.
Time is the great editor. It cuts, it fades, it rearranges our lives, until all that remains are the scenes that truly mattered. For Jonathan Haze, those scenes were never about fame or fortune or applause. They were about love. Love for stories, for people, for the fragile magic of cinema. Somewhere, a film reel still turns. Its light flickers through dust and darkness, casting Jonathan's shadow once more across the screen. He's there. Awkward smile, nervous hands, heart open to the world. He speaks, he stumbles, he believes. And though decades have passed, it feels immediate, alive, now. Because that's the strange alchemy of art. It keeps people living long after they're gone. Every time someone presses play, the past breathes again. Jonathan once said in an old interview, "Movies are the closest thing we have to ghosts. Not scary ones, but gentle ones. They remind us we were here." Those words have aged like truth. The cinema was never just about stories. It was about memory, the ability to hold time still and whisper, "Remember me like this." Jonathan understood that. He didn't need a monument or a star on the sidewalk. His memorial was motion itself, light moving across a wall, faces flickering into being and then fading again, like breathing. What Jonathan leaves us is not just nostalgia, it's a way of seeing. He teaches us that art doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be honest. He teaches that kindness and humility are not weaknesses, but strengths that outlast ambition. he teaches that the measure of a career is not how brightly it burns, but how warmly it touches. "If I ever inspired anyone," he once said, "I hope it was to believe in small things, because that's where truth hides." And maybe that's what made him timeless. His refusal to chase greatness and his quiet ability to achieve it anyway. As the years pass, Jonathan's story becomes part of something larger. Students still discover him, directors still mention him, and fans still quote his lines with affection. Every time The Little Shop of Horrors plays on a late-night channel, a new heart finds its way into his orbit. And somewhere, someone, a child, a dreamer, a future storyteller, watches Seymour feed his plant and thinks, maybe I can make something too. That is how legacy works. Not as a monument, but as a quiet echo that becomes another voice, another vision, another dream. The curtain falls, but the dream goes on. For every Jonathan Haze, there are 1,000 unseen artists who light the world in their own small ways. They are the cameramen in the rain, the editors who stay up through the night, the actors who never make the poster but make the story real. They are the reason we remember. They are the light beyond time. As the screen fades to black, a single candle flickers, its flame steady, unwavering. In its glow, Jonathan's voice is heard once more, from an old interview, his tone gentle and amused. "I never really thought I'd be remembered, but I guess if someone out there still smiles when they watch, then that's enough." The flame brightens, then dissolves into a slow fade of white light. For Jonathan Haze, the story never truly ended. It simply changed reels. He came to Hollywood chasing light, and in return, he became it. To those who dream in black and white, and to those who still believe in the small, impossible miracle of storytelling, this light is yours now.